Today we're diving into one of the most fascinating periods in American history. It's roughly from 1800 to 1848, a time when this one feeling just absolutely swept the nation. The idea that things, well, they just had to change. You know that feeling, right? That sense that the way things are just isn't working anymore. Well, imagine that feeling, but on a national scale. In the first half of the 19th century, millions of Americans didn't just feel it, they acted on it. They were driven by this incredible belief that they could literally perfect themselves and their society. So, what was in the water? What created this massive urge for change? Let's dig in. All right, so this explosion of activism didn't just pop up out of thin air. It was really the result of a perfect storm, where these huge social, economic, and religious forces all slammed into each other at the same time, creating the perfect conditions for a total transformation. And this is really the key to the whole thing. This wasn't some government program handed down from on high. Nope. This was a genuine grassroots wave of people voluntarily getting together, feeling empowered to completely reshape their world from the ground up. So you had three main ingredients in this perfect storm. First, the democratic ideals from the American Revolution were really sinking in, giving people a sense of their own power. Second, you had the market revolution, a massive economic shift with factories and canals that created all sorts of new problems. And third, and this was a big one, a huge religious revival called the Second Great Awakening swept the country, convincing people that improving society wasn't just a good idea, it was their sacred duty. Okay, so you've got all this pent-up energy, right? It had to go somewhere. And it flowed into all these different movements, starting with some really audacious attempts to build a better person and even a better world from scratch. You know, some folks looked at society and said, forget reforming it, let's just start over. These utopian communities were these incredible, deliberate experiments where people tried to build a perfect world in miniature, rethinking everything from property and work to family itself. And this is where you really see that classic clash between big ideas and, well, reality. The Shakers aimed for total equality, but since they were celibate, they had a pretty big problem with population growth. Brook Farm, what a great idea, right? Get brilliant minds and have them do manual labor. Turns out, the intellectuals weren't super thrilled about, digging in the dirt. And Fruitlands was so extreme in its ideals that its members basically almost starved. The vision was there, but real life had a way of getting in the way. Now, while some people were trying to build new worlds, a whole lot more were focused on fixing a huge problem in the existing one: alcohol. We might look at this today and think, okay, it's a public health issue. But back then, oh no. This was a full-blown moral crusade against what they saw as a national sin. And there was a very good reason for this. The average American back then drank about 5 gallons of hard liquor every year. 5 gallons. Just let that sink in for a second. Just to give you some context here, that's about 3 times what people drink today. Alcohol was absolutely everywhere, and reformers pointed to it as the source of pretty much everything bad: crime, poverty, family breakdown, you name it. And believe me, this was not a simple, straightforward fight. You had groups like the American Temperance Society, which got huge support from factory owners who, frankly, just wanted sober workers. But then you had German and Irish immigrants pushing back hard, seeing it as an attack on their culture. And right in the middle, you had women's groups who were a massive force, arguing that temperance was all about protecting their families. But wait, there's more. This reform bug, it was contagious. It just spread everywhere. You had incredible people like Dorothea Dix, who almost single-handedly changed how the country treated the mentally ill. You had pioneers like Lauren Clark opening up the world of education for the deaf. Activists like William Apes were fighting for Native American rights. And even colleges like Oberlin were starting to break down barriers, admitting women and Black students. But while many of these reforms were about improving society, 2 movements weren't just about tweaking the system. They were about shattering its very foundations: the battle to end slavery and the fight for women's rights. See, for a growing number of Americans, slavery wasn't a political debate. It wasn't about economics. It was a sin, a deep moral stain on the soul of the nation. And when you see something that way, there's just no room for compromise. Just look at a guy like the radical abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. He was so convinced that the U.S. Constitution protected slavery that he called it a covenant with death and publicly burned a copy. I mean, can you imagine? It was a shocking thing to do, but it just goes to show you how deep that moral outrage ran. And then you have the powerhouse, Frederick Douglass, who had escaped slavery himself.
His argument was just so profound. In his autobiography, he explains that slavery doesn't just destroy the person who's enslaved. It rots the soul of the enslaver, too, turning a kind person cruel. It corrupts everything and everyone it touches.
And Douglas was far from alone. You had this incredible range of voices. People like the Grimke sisters, who grew up in a slaveholding family in the South and turned against it, using their insider knowledge to fight the system. And you had radical voices like David Walker, who called for an immediate end to slavery, even if it meant violent resistance. Okay, and here's a really crucial connection. The fight against slavery directly sparks the next big movement. As women poured their energy into the abolitionist cause, they kept hitting this wall. They realized, wait a minute, how can we fight for someone else's freedom when we don't even have our own basic rights? All that frustration finally came to a head in 1848 at the Seneca Falls Convention. Led by absolute trailblazers like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, this was the first ever convention organized by women to demand their rights. This was it, the starting gun for the organized women's rights movement in America. And what they did was just genius, absolutely brilliant. They took the most famous line from the Declaration of Independence and made one tiny but revolutionary edit. Think about the power of that. Just two little words, "and women," and they completely reframed America's founding promise. They were saying, hey, that promise, that belongs to us too. And then they laid it all out, a whole list of grievances. They couldn't vote, had basically no legal rights in a marriage, were locked out of good jobs and higher education. I mean, they were systematically treated like second-class citizens, and they were just done with it. So, after all this turmoil, all this passion, what's the takeaway here? This era didn't magically solve all of America's problems, not by a long shot, but its legacy is absolutely profound. I think the most important thing to remember is this. This period really cemented a powerful idea in the American identity, the idea that real, lasting change often doesn't come from the top down. It bubbles up from the bottom, from everyday people looking around and saying, you know what, we can do better.
And you know what? That spirit, that fundamental belief that we can push for a better world, it's still out there. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What are the big reform movements shaping our world right now? And 100 years from now, what will people say was their legacy?